Has immigration been a net gain or a net loss for this country? Well, if you're a Native American, I think you would probably conclude it was a really bad idea. This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I would like to welcome you to this edition of Fair Game. Immigration is a hot topic in America today, and substantial numbers of Americans are asking questions. How many more immigrants can we take? Have we reached a tipping point? Are immigrants hurting America? Well, it reminds me of a cartoon I saw in one of the newspapers a few years ago. And it had two Native Americans standing on the beach at Plymouth Rock watching the first longboat come to the shore loaded with Englishmen. And the one Native looks at the other one and said, "Do you think we should build a wall?" The issues of immigration and what it means to be American go back almost to the founding of the country. In the 1790s, there's a real fear that the radical ideas of the French Revolution are going to suck America into the vortex of revolutionary extremism. And one of the founders, John Adams, who was on the committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence, did one of the few things in his career that shed no glory on him when he supported the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts that lengthened the amount of time that an immigrant had to be in this country to become a citizen and would greatly empower the government to exclude people, but also to kick folks out who were guilty of unpopular speech. Fortunately, those acts were largely repealed under Thomas Jefferson. But they are interesting questions, and I really think that in a republic, the easiest thing for us to do is to demonize the people we disagree with. And so, whichever side of the immigration debate you are on, you are convinced that your side is the repository of all virtue, and your opponents are guilty of all vice. So I think it's worth asking a couple questions. Has immigration been a net gain or a net loss for this country? Well, if you're a Native American, I think you would probably conclude it was a really bad idea, because things haven't gone well for Native Americans since the white folks got here. But fairly early on, the Protestant European majority wanted to exclude certain populations from this country. My home state of Maryland, we didn't let Jews in until the 1840s because they were not the right kind of immigrant. Many states tried to exclude Catholics. In fact, in one of the most spectacularly addle-headed exercises in American history, otherwise known as the American Party, in popular parlance known as the Know-Nothings, because they had to take a secret oath to join. I think they also had a secret handshake. If you were asked anything about being in the party, your answer was, "I know nothing." And the Know-Nothings wanted to exclude Catholics and immigrants and Jews from coming in the country. Abraham Lincoln recognized long before he got to the White House what a threat to the Republic that kind of thinking is. He said, if I would acknowledge the rightness of excluding a man for being a Catholic, then I could also exclude him for being a Presbyterian or a Baptist. Lincoln understood as not just a great political leader, but I think perhaps the great political philosopher of America and maybe the greatest theologian of the Republic. Lincoln recognized that trying to build a healthy republic on exclusion is not really a good idea. And I think one of my problems is, all right, there certainly are people who don't need to come here. Felons don't need to come here. Murderers, rapists don't need to come here. That should be obvious enough, and we should be able to handle that through the normal immigration procedures. But if we are talking about folks who shouldn't come here, well, in 1882, there was a consensus in the United States Congress that we shouldn't let in the Chinese. And prior to that, there were great efforts to exclude the Irish. Who do you exclude, and what's the basis for the exclusion? I think that's a critical question. If you look at American history, first of all, we're all immigrants. All of us came from somewhere. Even Native Americans came from somewhere. Their roots are probably in North Central Asia. No one is really native to this soil. But if we look at immigrants, well, there's Enrico Fermi and Albert Einstein, who are fathers of the nuclear age. There's Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung in philosophy. There is George Gershwin, who actually has two strikes against him because the family comes from Ukraine and they're Jewish. His birth name was Moishe Gershowitz. That might have been a problem in Hollywood in the 1930s. That might be a problem in Hollywood anytime. But Moishe Gershowitz really didn't sound like a great stage name. But if you listen to the music of Gershwin, you hate to think that he would have been excluded on the basis of being Jewish. Now, of course, America has always been very careful about who they excluded. We were always happy to take white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Well, that got a little bit dicey because in the 1840s we started picking up a lot of Germans. And most of the WASP were convinced that Germans were stupid and that we really shouldn't take them in. Well, they got here because the immigration laws weren't very tight in the 1840s and 50s. And over time, the WASP decided that the Germans could also be white. Later on, from 1880 to 1920, we brought in a lot of Italians. Now, the WASP were sure that they weren't white. They were olive-complected to a great degree. But when the WASP needed them to maintain their voting majorities in certain states, they decided that Italians could also be white. Now, a good friend of mine is Mexican-American, and he was getting a driver's license in Pennsylvania. And when he's filling it out, you're either white, or you're black, or you're Asian, or you're other. Well, he looked at it and he didn't see a place where he fit. So he went back to the lady at the counter and said, I don't fit here. And she looked at him and she said, well, what are you? He said, I'm Mexican American. She said, you're white. And he said, ma'am, could I shake your hand? He said, my family's been in Texas for 5 generations, and we've been trying to be white, but they won't let us be white in Texas. I had to come to Pennsylvania to be white. It really is absurd when you think about it. In fact, the very notion of exclusion on the basis of color is ridiculous. I want you to imagine the darkest Anglo person you have ever met. And I want you to imagine the African American with the lightest skin tone you have ever met. There's a decent chance that the white is darker than the black. Anybody feeling me on this one? Immigration. Who gets to be here and why? Theodore Roosevelt said that anyone should become an American who is willing to live under the laws of this land and commit themselves to this great experiment of democracy. I like that. This is Dr. Gary Kellner. Thank you for joining us for Fair Game.